In Australia this week, we are commemorating ANZAC Day. ANZAC Day is a day of remembrance for the soldiers who served overseas for our country, but it holds special significance for my family. My dad served in Vietnam, my brother served in Afghanistan, my grandfather World War II, my great-grandfather World War One. It's 4 generations of the one family that have all served in wartime. It's a legacy that means a lot to me. But what does a Vietnam veteran have to say about, and to, the soldiers that served in Afghanistan, Iraq, these young men? I spoke to my dad during the lockdown about this interview, and I listened to it again the other day, and I really want to bring it to you again. There is no video to it. It was a phone call. For people on YouTube, I'll try and put something pretty up for you so it doesn't look too boring. But it's an audio conversation that I had with my dad, and some of the things that he has to say towards the end about our younger veterans are something that, if you know a young man or woman who is struggling and they need to hear from a veteran a positive message of hope, then this conversation is for you. Let's dive in, see what happens. Welcome back to Shattered, the podcast. I have on the line today a Vietnam veteran who happens to be my father. G'day, Dad. How's it going?
No, pretty good, even with the lockdown.
Even with the lockdown. Now, you were a corporal attached to 17 Construction Workshop in Vietnam in 1967-68.
You can fit it in December 67, December 68, 365 days, but who counted?
No, I've not heard of any of the Vietnam veterans who counted down their time overseas there. I thought you were having a great time. So I want to talk about how we've got a situation in Afghanistan, how the war over there is winding down, and there are distinct parallels to what happened in the Vietnam War. And I want to just get your perspective from your service through to the end of the Vietnam War. So 1967, December 1967, you land in Vietnam. You spend, as you said, 365 days there. Was there a thought at the time that you were in a war that you were trying to win? And I mean that in the way of thinking the guys that went into World War II were thinking, okay, we've got a clear enemy, we know who to beat. What was your perception of what your country was doing in Vietnam?
Well, we were not what you'd call indoctrinated. We were told why we were going. I had no reason to not believe the reasons we were there.
Uh-huh.
And immediately going there, we found out that locals were employed in our workshop to give jobs, to not just get them there labouring for us, but getting there doing jobs. And I got to know some locals. First, when I went there, it was the adventure of a lifetime, being a 19-year-old country boy, first trip overseas, and very, very quickly it set in that this was not a joke. And that, I'll tell you what changed, well, that showed me it wasn't an adventure. Reality set in. I went into town one afternoon, about second month I was there, and there's a young guy sitting in the street, one leg missing, in what was left of his Vietnamese Ranger uniform, with a begging bowl in front of him. And suddenly I thought, he's my age. That could be me sitting there. And I thought, this is not an adventure for him. This is real. That's reality for him for the rest of his life. And I made up my mind there and then that I don't care why the government sent us there. If I could help that kid or others becoming that kid, I felt that I was doing the right thing being there.
Vietnam, famously, there was no kind of real set end game apart from propping up the South Vietnamese government. Did you feel at the time that that was an achievable goal? Did you feel like you were over there contributing to success?
I did, because we spent a lot of time. We had the American airfield close to us, and part of my job was going to the airfield, and always there was a lot of combined, you'd call it coalition operations nowadays, because don't forget there were several nations in Vietnam helping to defend the South, as it were. And the South Vietnamese soldiers, to me, really impressed me. They looked determined, well-equipped, well-trained, well-disciplined. And I thought, if we can help them win, and the more I saw of them, I thought they will win, because these guys were just the epitome of soldiering. Yeah. And I thought we could help them do that and pull out when they were ready.
Yeah. So comes 1972, and you hear that Australia is leaving Vietnam. You are at this time a regular soldier. You weren't conscripted. You joined the army as a volunteer, and you made a career out of it. So your perception in 1972, what did you see was happening at that stage when Australia pulled out? Did you think that the war had been lost? Were you thinking of it in those terms? Or were you more just thinking, oh, maybe we've done the job that we needed to do?
Keep in mind that Australia deployed approximately 6,000 to 8,000 men each for 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
America had 273,000 men deployed.
Yeah,
we were tasked with policing one province, Phu Thuy, and the Australian infantry guys, armoured, the fighting corps guys, did a great job, and they did suppress the activities of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese to the extent that Phu Thuy was reasonably peaceful. And I thought, okay, now is the time to hand that province back to the locals and let them defend it themselves. And I thought we'd achieved that. I wasn't filled with dread when I heard that Australia was coming home, and mainly because every time you hear of a young serviceman dying, you think that's one more family that this country's given up. We've given up in the First World War, the Second World War, go back a bit, the Boer War, Korean War. We're only a small nation. We've done our bit, but now let's let them defend themselves. And so, no, I didn't feel any concern as such when Australia was pulling out.
1972, Australia's pulled out. Australians are very comfortable with that. We feel like we did what we were expected to do. Then you've got 1973, 74, 75, and the news media is there in force. So you're getting almost nightly updates on how poorly things are going in Vietnam, to the point where in 1975, Saigon fell. How was this time for you?
Well, those nightly updates did quickly show me that my misconception of the South Vietnamese military fighting abilities wasn't what I thought it was, because you could see streets leading out of Saigon where military uniforms were just discarded. That, to me, that as an Australian serviceman, that was almost inconceivable. But I don't know the mind of a nation that's been at war with the Dutch, with the French, with the Americans, all that time at war. You cannot judge them and say they were cowards. They're more realists to me. There's an overwhelming army coming against you. You know, local support. They couldn't count on local support because they lost faith in their own government in South Vietnam.
Yeah.
And hindsight shows how corrupt they were.
Yeah.
But it was disappointing to see how they'd given up without a giant big brother standing behind them.
Yeah.
And I felt dread. I thought, I hope when the communists do come in, there's not mass slaughter. I didn't think there would be, but I thought the Vietnamese people themselves, they're a strong, strong nation. Their military let them down, but the people themselves, I thought they would stand.
Well, they went on to win a war against China, if you can believe that. It's the postscript was one of a nation triumphing over unbelievable obstacles. Did you happen to know personally any of the diggers that didn't come home?
No. We had one craftsman injured when he was up on the land clearing team, and the D9 Caterpillar dozer who was on, the driver, operator, I should say.
Yeah.
He hit a landmine and he bailed ship. One of our craftsmen saw it. He was up there driving a servicing truck. Well, he leapt onto a burning, moving bulldozer and shut it down. And he got injured.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the closest I came to knowing any injured or...
Yeah. Why I ask that is we have a very, very unique perspective on the fall of Afghanistan because your son, my brother, a veteran of over there who has come back with PTSD, he's finding it extremely hard at the moment. I never really understood how close he felt to one of the soldiers that was killed, and I don't want to name that person because I don't want to embarrass Mike or the family of the digger that was killed. But Mike had to clean the gear of a digger that had been killed in combat, and he did it with respect and dignity. And when another soldier was flippant in the room, an officer actually, Mike, who was a corporal, told the guy to get out, said, "Get out. This is not the place for that sort of thing." So for Mike, his perspective is intensely personal, and he's very willing to see that everything that he did was wasted. Now, I know you've got thoughts about his time in Afghanistan, and I want to ask you about that, but when Saigon fell, did you feel like you'd lost a year of your life that could have been better spent? You were away from your family, you were away from your fiancé. Did you feel at all that the time that you had spent in Vietnam was a waste?
No, I didn't. Earlier I said I got to know personally some of the locals, and there was one domestic lady in our unit, the same age as my mum. I jokingly did call her mum once in Vietnamese. I can't remember what that, Mama San, I think it was. And she joked. She said to me when I was there, I did ask you, what do you think of us being here in your country? And she said, well, as a young girl, 13 or 14, when the communists were coming to power in North Vietnam, in Hanoi, her father, a Catholic man, a Catholic family, decided they wouldn't live under the communists. This was an intelligent man. He knew what the communist view of Christianity was. So he literally packed up the family, couldn't take anything with them, literally what they carried in a cart, and trekked all the way down from Hanoi to Saigon. I thought, what a brave man, what a brave family to do that. They were fortunate. They were able to, they got some names of towns and where you could find a priest and get the name of some families. So they were semi-supported all the way. But she said, we don't want to live under the communist rule. We like our freedom. And that's all I could think of when Saigon fell was her. That she's lived through, one country, she was North Vietnamese, being taken over. She comes to South Vietnam for freedom and have that taken over. But the strength of that lady, I thought, no, I don't need to worry about her. She would have possibly been interrogated by the officials after the fall, but as a domestic staff, she was a cleaner, probably suffered a month of interrogation or something, but I had no dread for her. Her reassurance that we were there to help them was the thing that I remembered. And no, I did not feel our time there was wasted at all.
Do you think that it would be fair to say that it's better to have been there for a short time to teach, to build up, to show what freedom looks like is better than not having gone at all?
Yes, most definitely. Vietnam became the American war, and if they fall into this trap again and again, I think I'm not sure they go with the right intention. I've since studied a lot on the war in Vietnam, and my reasons for being there have changed with a bit of enlightenment.
I guess you can look at the reasons that politicians have. And I think about this with Afghanistan, and I've thought about this a lot. And the thing is, Mike went there with mentoring teams. The first time he was there, all he did was work with Afghan civilians, skilling them up. He talked about the incredible bag of tools that they handed over to these potential craftsmen at the end of their time. And he also talks about the wounded kids that were there. I will not put words in the mouth of any veteran because I was not there and I do not have that right. But I wonder how much better, say, that little girl that Mike saw that had been blown up, and he saw her at the hospital and he just broke down, how much better it was for her to be around caring people like my brother, like most Australian veterans. I hope that the fact that they were there is infinitely better than if they weren't there.
I totally agree. In this mentoring team, that concept, whoever dreamed it up, was very, very wise, because I did see the toolkits they were sending to the young tradies that now it wasn't a full tradesman's course. They were something like 3 to 4 months training, but they were given basic plumbing, carpentering, even electrical skills. They could wire a house properly, safely, build a house, build a school. That to me was brilliant. We didn't have the same sort of task in South Vietnam. It was, I think, to defend the population, but to restrict the movement and the provisioning of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army.
Yeah.
So I believed in the coalition cause in Afghanistan. And as you say, we had first-hand experience with your son and brother, Mike, going there 4 times. And first-hand experience there, explaining it to us and what they were doing there, to me was absolutely brilliant. The problem was the length of stay. We stayed because America stayed. America achieved its aim when it defeated Al-Qaeda. In hindsight's a wonderful thing, but why didn't they leave soon after that? That is the problem, is the length of stay. So your question, whether it had been better to come in for a short while, sure. As I said, hindsight shows that if we'd have pulled out early, it's an open-ended question, as in, how long's a piece of string?
Well, and we can't tell what's going to happen in Afghanistan after this. You've got a bunch of educated men and women now that are skilled up, that are qualified to work for their own betterment. And will they rise up against the Taliban? Will they assimilate and try and make the Taliban less fanatical? I mean, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen, and we are speaking very close to it. But for any Afghan veteran out there, or Iraq, or any of the troops that deployed to the Middle East, I'm devastated at this thought that they think that their time was wasted, that their sacrifice, that the blokes that died, the men and women that have come back with PTSD was all a waste. I'm just horrified that they would feel like that.
Yeah, I am too. How can you tell a young veteran that his intention was going there was sound? What he achieved there was remarkable, because they don't think that during their time there. Their effect there can only be measured over time. And I think you take a young guy like Mike in a mentoring role where you can see the number of schools built, hospitals built or rebuilt, to see the local children going to school freely without terror of reprisals. What they did, I believe, over their time there was improve literally everything, their way of life. You can't stand there with a big stick forever, but they started, I think, to have a little bit of faith in their own army of protecting them. Because where Afghan army was disciplined and trained enough, the Americans left them to monitor, police an area. And so I think these young guys and girls gave a period of relative peace to the Afghanis, providing them with a reasonable amount of stability. And as I said to you, not in this interview, but the Afghan people, proud, strong people, they've had this period of reasonable stability, a time of education for both young men and young women. I think they will hold on to that and want it to remain. So whether in time, 5 years, 10 years, they start to demand these freedoms that they've experienced. And it's all be to the credit of these young men and women who went there.
Yeah. I think of young Afghani women who are going to marry and they're going to have the ear of their husbands where they're able to say, hang on, no, I remember what it's like to be able to go to school.
Mm.
Why are we not letting our girls go to school? It's easier to not let a person have rights than to take away rights from somebody that's already had them. Somebody that's lived free, knows what freedom is, and will petition harder to maintain or regain that freedom.
I agree.
Earlier in the interview, you were talking about the impact of the Vietnam War, but you said a couple of years later there was something that affected you.
Remaining in the service, they expect any NCO to further his career by attaining the next promotion. And to do that, you need to do what they call subjects. And there's 4 subjects, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Includes everything from military law to how you're called. Well, one of the toughest ones is your subject 1 for corporal, sergeant, warrant officer. And all corps come together. There's about 80 guys on every course. And it's very much regimental, fieldcraft work. Well, mate, I was a tradie. I was very good at my job, but come regimental and come fieldcraft, I just got by. Well, in my section, there was an infantry corporal, wonderful guy. He was the epitome of a soldier, head to toe, brilliantly dressed, pressed uniform, immaculate. But he had trouble with the theory side of field navigation, very simple triangular calculations. Well, he was passing the course in everything regimental except for this, and he was told to come and see the boffins. Well, he was a radio technician, but I got talking to this guy and helped him instantly, gave him a simple way of calculating. I was just sitting in my room, just talking, and he had a few tennies cans with him, and he got to talking, and just talking about his life in the service, his life in Vietnam, and he just said, Kev, you guys are fortunate. You get out of the army, you've got a trade, you can go walk straight out, high pay. He said, what can I do? I'm a qualified section leader. And then he stopped at that and said, not a very good one at that. I said, Norm, you're kidding. You'll top this course. You'll dux the course. And he said, yeah, but Vietnam, I lost 2 guys. It suddenly brought home to me that Vietnam, Afghanistan, to the fighting cause, this was their job. Mine was to fix radios. This guy had carried with him the burden of losing 2 guys in Vietnam. Now, it wasn't his fault, but he is like a father figure to these young guys. He's probably 22, 23-year-old in Vietnam, whereas most kids with him are 18. But he carried the burden of losing these 2 men. And it brought home to me just what these young men and now young women go or give up to go and serve this country, this government of this country, in helping other governments or the people of other governments in other countries. It changed my outlook on every time they announce sending servicemen to another country on anything, peacekeeping, whatever. It's a struggle within me. What do they achieve? Are we sending these young men and women into harm's way because in some cases these useless, corrupt politicians can't sort out their problems without resorting to force. It's made me a little bit bitter and twisted with the government of the day, but never bitter and twisted with as far as regard to the people that we go to help. I still think of that young guy. I was a whole 20, I think at the time I was about 27, 28-year-old. And he'd aged, we're the same age, but he looked probably 10 years older. He'd carried the burden of the guilt of losing two men. And it changed my idea of what war is about for these young men and women.
Yeah. I want to give you the last word because I want to give you the opportunity to say to a veteran of Afghanistan who has struggled when they came back and may be looking at their time as a waste. But before I do that, I want to just put a thought out there. And I don't know if this thought is true. I don't know if this is accurate or if it's disrespectful. I don't mean it to be. But the Australian and coalition forces spent 20 years equipping, training, helping the Afghan people. And I look at these thousands of people at the airports and I understand there's fathers and mothers there that are trying to protect their children. But it's like that old adage, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. It's like you can lead a soldier to battle, but you can't make him fight. And I don't know why so many Afghans chose not to resist. And I don't understand that. But I don't think you can blame the people that trained them for them not making that final decision to fight at the end there. It's not the fault of the person that led the person and gave them what they were asking for. It's not their fault that the people then chose not to rise up or fight or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. A young man or young woman who may be listening to this obeyed their government's call to go and do this to help the people of Afghanistan. Now, I totally believe that they did their job. They did it well. The young guys, girls that built schools, they didn't do a half-shod job thinking, oh, this will do. They did it their best. They provided the people with tools to help themselves. The young guys and girls that trained their Afghan army, I believe they did their very best. As you said, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. These young guys passed on their knowledge of warfare, of use of care and use of weapons, and how to use them properly to achieve victory for themselves. How can you blame yourself where your training and your expertise handed over the best way you could not be used or employed the way that you trained somebody? If you trained a young electrician to build a school, wire a house, and he electrocutes somebody, if you've trained him to the best of your ability and he has passed the test that they have to sit to get these qualifications, that's not your fault. If you train a young man to use a weapon, to use your own people to help protect a village, and they fail to do that, how can you say that that's your fault? You did your best. You achieved what you went over there to do, and it was your right to leave them to defend themselves and to come home. You cannot take any of that blame. I know this nation is proud of you. I am. Don't blame yourself.
Warrant Officer Kevin Brosnan, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your words, and there's nothing I can add to that. Thanks, Dad.
Pleasure, mate.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Shattered the Podcast. I'm Mark. Special thanks to my producer, Meredith Brosnan, and also to Torian, Kevin, and Lorraine. And we can't forget the amazing band Adelaide, who let us use their song as our theme. For more information, check us out on all your socials, STP Shattered the Podcast.